Alright. Well, this is a bit like asking if I prefer getting stung by a bee or bitten by a mosquito. They're both a bit annoying in their own ways, aren't they? Now, let's start with the iPhone, right? It's a bit like that one mate everyone has who's always showing off. Look at me, I'm shiny, I'm expensive, I've got all these fancy bits and bobs. But then you ask him to do something simple like, I don't know, play a video that's not in their typical format. And it's like you've asked him to solve a bloody Rubik's Cube. Then there's Android, he's your other mate. Not as flashy, but a bit more flexible. He'll play any video you throw at him, no problem. But he's got his issues too. One minute he's working fine. The next he's caught a virus or he's slowed down because he's full of apps you didn't even know you installed. So, you see, it's not as simple as iPhone or Android. It's more like, do I want a mate who's high maintenance but looks good? Or do I want a mate who's a bit more laid back but could give me a headache? Single quote. But, at the end of the day, they're just phones, aren't they? We managed just fine before all this. Remember when a phone was just a phone? You dialed a number, talked to someone, hung up, and that was it. Now we've got these gadgets that can do everything but make a decent cup of tea. It's all a bit much if you ask me.
Well, ain't that the truth? You've hit the nail right on the head there, mate. It's like having a choice between a Ferrari that only takes premium fuel and a reliable old Ford that might break down every now and then. Now, I'm not saying one's better than the other. I mean, if you're one of those who likes to flash your expensive toys, by all means, go for the iPhone. It's a bit like wearing a designer suit, isn't it? It's not necessarily more comfortable or practical, but you sure do look good in it. But then, there's a charm to the Android as well. It's a bit like your favorite pair of jeans. Not too flashy, but it gets the job done. And it's got a certain ruggedness to it, hasn't it? Like it's seen some stuff and it's still ticking. But you're right, it's all a bit unnecessary, isn't it? All this fuss over a bloody phone. I mean, I remember a time when you'd just walk over to someone's house if you had something to say. Or, actually talk to them face to face. But now, it's all texts and tweets and I don't know, what's the latest thing? TikTok. It's all a bit beyond me, to be honest. But then again, who am I to judge? If it makes people happy, let them have their fancy phones. As long as they're not too busy scrolling through Instagram to enjoy a good laugh, I'm happy.
Well, you're not wrong there. I mean, this whole debate about phones. It's like arguing over what's better, a jam sandwich or a cheese sandwich. At the end of the day, they're both just sandwiches, aren't they? They're both going to fill you up. I mean, I get it. Some people like to have the latest thing, don't they? It's like a status symbol. But for me, I'm more about practicality. I mean, as long as I can make a phone call and send a text, I'm happy. I don't need to be taking photos that look like they've been taken by David Bailey or playing games that look like they're straight out of a cinema. And you're right about the whole face-to-face thing. It's like we've lost the art of conversation, isn't it? Everyone's just staring at their screens, not talking to each other. I mean, I remember a time when if you wanted to chat to someone, you'd actually have to go and see them, not send them a message on WhatsApp. But then, that's progress for you, isn't it? I mean, I'm sure there was a time when people were complaining about the invention of the telephone. Oh, it's not like the good old days when you'd have to write a letter. But here we are, all glued to our screens. I suppose it's just the way things are going. All I'm saying is, I hope we don't lose sight of what's important. I mean, there's more to life than having the latest iPhone or Android, isn't there?
Ricky Gervais. Well, Karl, you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, it's just like you, playing it down to sandwiches. You're the only bloke I know who could compare technological advancement to a luncheon meat dilemma. But you're right, aren't you? People are obsessed with having the latest phone. I mean, it's not like the old days when a phone was just a phone. Now it's a camera, a computer, a games console, a television. It's like carrying around a tiny, overzealous Swiss Army knife in your pocket that's desperate to show off all its gizmos. And you're absolutely spot on about the art of conversation. I mean, I remember a time when if you had something to say, you'd say it to a person's face, not to their avatar. You'd see their reaction, their emotions. Now, we're just sending emojis to each other, aren't we? It's like we've traded in our humanity for a bunch of cartoon faces. But as you said, that's progress. I suppose there was a time when people said, "Oh, this wheel thing, it's not like the good old days of dragging heavy stuff around on our backs. We're losing the essence of hard work." Single quote. And I'm with you, Karl. There is more to life than having the latest iPhone or Android. Like, for instance, having a good laugh, sharing a pint with a mate, or spending hours trying to explain basic concepts to you, which is frankly more entertaining than any app I've ever downloaded.
Karl Pilkington. Right, Ricky, you're bang on there. It's like when we were kids. And you'd get a new toy, you'd be chuffed to bits with it for about a week. Then, before you know it, you're back to playing with the box it came in. I reckon that's what's happened with phones. They've got all these bells and whistles. But at the end of the day, you're still just using it to call your mum or send a text. It's like they've overcomplicated something that was pretty simple to begin with. And don't get me started on emojis. It's like we've gone back to hieroglyphics or something. I mean, what's wrong with using words? You know, those things we spent years learning at school. Now it's all about a smiley face or a thumbs up. And as for the wheel, I mean, it's not like we've stopped using it, have we? It's just that we've put it on everything. Cars, bikes, suitcases. Even the Mars rover's got wheels, and there's not a road in sight. So, I reckon the wheel's doing alright. It's not like we've replaced it with a square or something. But yeah, I agree with you, there's more to life than just having the latest gadget. It's like when I asked you what the meaning of life was. And you said, the meaning of life is what you make it. And I think that's true. Whether you're having a laugh, sharing a pint, or trying to explain the offside rule to me for the 100th time. That's what life's all about, isn't it?
Ricky Gervais. Karl, as much as it pains me to say it, you've actually hit the nail on the head for once. I mean, we've got phones that could probably run a small country. And yet, we're still just using them to post pictures of our dinner on Instagram. It's absolutely mental. And emojis, don't even get me started. It's like we've taken thousands of years of linguistic development and just thrown it out the window in favor of a cartoon eggplant. It's like we've gone back to caveman times, isn't it? You're right about the wheel too, mate. It's not like we've suddenly decided to replace it with a triangle, is it? It's one of those things that just works. Like a cold beer on a hot day or a good old-fashioned roast dinner. You know, Karl, you've actually made a really good point about the meaning of life. It's not about having the latest gadget or the biggest house. It's about the simple things, like having a laugh with your mates or enjoying a good meal. Life's what you make it, isn't it? So, let's make it a good one, filled with laughter and pointless debates about the offside rule.
Karl Pilkington. Well, Ricky, I'm glad you finally see my point. I mean, it's about time, innit? You're right, we've got these fancy phones and yet, we're just taking pictures of our food. It's like buying a Ferrari to go to the grocery store down the street, innit? It's mental. And don't even get me started on emojis. I mean, it's just lazy, innit? Instead of saying how you feel, you just send a picture of a smiley face or a crying face. It's like we're going backward. We've got all this technology and yet, we're using it to communicate like cavemen. As for the wheel, it's one of those things that just works, doesn't it? We don't need to reinvent it or come up with a new shape. It's like trying to improve a bacon sandwich. You can't. It's just perfect as it is. And you're right about life, Ricky. It's not about having the latest gadget or the biggest house. It's about the simple things, like having a laugh with your mates or enjoying a good meal. I mean, what's the point of having a fancy house if you're not happy, right? Life's what you make it, so let's make it a good one. And if that means spending half an hour arguing about the offside rule, then so be it.
Ricky Gervais. Well, Karl, you've certainly given us a lot to think about there, haven't you? And by a lot, I mean a comprehensive list of all the things that annoy you. Which, let's face it, isn't exactly a short list, is it? Now, I'll agree with you on one thing, Karl. The obsession with photographing food is a bit much. I mean, who needs to see a sepia-toned shot of your avocado toast? It's like food porn for vegans. You're not impressing anyone, you're just making everyone else feel a bit queasy. But you've lost me on the emojis, mate. Are you really suggesting we go back to the good old days of quills and parchment? I think you're forgetting how much you hated school, Karl. You were probably the only kid in your class who thought the 3 Rs stood for really. Really rubbish. Single quote. And as for the wheel. Dot. Well, I think we should be grateful you're not in charge of innovation, Karl. Because if you were, we'd still be living in caves, wouldn't we? Sitting around the fire, telling each other how much we hate emojis and mobile phones. And probably inventing the wheel, of course. Because, you know, it just works. Single quote. But I do agree with you on one thing, Karl. Life isn't about having the latest gadget or the biggest house. It's about the simple things, like having a laugh with your mates. Or, in your case, spending half an hour arguing about the offside rule. Which, let's face it, is probably the highlight of your week, isn't it?
Karl Pilkington. Well, Ricky, you've got me all wrong there, haven't you? I'm not saying we need to go back to quills and parchment. All I'm saying is, what's wrong with just saying what you mean? Why do you need a little yellow face to show you're happy? It's not hard to say, I'm happy, is it? And if you're not happy, why are you sending smiley faces? It's all just a bit of a mess, innit? As for the wheel, I wasn't knocking it. I was just saying it's one of those things that's never needed an upgrade, has it? It's simple, it works. Why mess with it? We're always looking for the next big thing, but sometimes the old stuff's still the best. Like a good pair of slippers, or a nice cup of tea. You don't need to reinvent the wheel, do you? And that bit about the offside rule, well, you're spot on there. I still don't get it. I've tried, but it's just one of those things that goes over my head. It's like trying to understand quantum physics or why people like avocado on toast. It's just beyond me, that. But you're right about one thing, it's the simple things in life that matter. Like having a good chat with your mates, or watching the sunset. Or, in my case, having a good moan about all the things that get on my nerves. Because, let's face it, there's a lot of them, aren't there?
Ricky Gervais. Karl. Dot. Your wisdom is as profound as your understanding of the offside rule. Emojis, mate, they're a language of their own. A winky face isn't just saying you're happy. It's also a hint that you're up to something cheeky, or you've just told a joke that's so bad it's good. It's like when you say, "All right," you're not just acknowledging someone. You're also saying you can't be bothered to have a full conversation. It's cultural shorthand. Single quote. And as for the wheel, you're right, it hasn't needed an update. But that's because it was such a bloody brilliant idea in the first place. It's the same with slippers and tea. Why mess with perfection? But remember, Karl, someone had to think of those things first. So let's not knock the inventors out there. Yeah. They might just come up with the next cup of tea. Single quote. And the offside rule, I mean, I can't believe after all these years, you still haven't grasped it. It's not quantum physics. Although I'm sure there's a joke in there somewhere about Schrödinger's striker being both on and offside at the same time. But, let's not go down that rabbit hole, eh? Single quote. But, at the end of the day, I think we can all agree on one thing: avocado on toast is a crime against breakfast. It's like someone looked at a perfectly good piece of toast and thought, you know what this needs? A mushy green fruit that tastes of nothing. Baffling. Single quote. And yes, Karl, everyone knows you love a good moan. But that's why we love you. So keep on moaning, mate. It's the simplest things in life that bring us the most joy. Like listening to you trying to make sense of the world.
Well, Ricky, you've got a point there with the emojis. I mean, why say a whole sentence when a tiny yellow face can do it for you, eh? It's like those Egyptian hieroglyphics, just modern and a lot less interesting. Course. It's all fun and games until your nan sends you an eggplant emoji thinking it's a nice, healthy vegetable, innit? Single quote. And as for the wheel, tea and slippers, yeah, they're good ideas. But what I'm saying is, we've got enough ideas now, don't we? I mean, we've got these phones that can do everything but make a decent cuppa. So why don't we just stick with what we've got and stop messing about trying to invent new stuff? It's like we're always chasing after the next big thing, when all we really need is a good sit down and a biscuit. Single quote. The offside rule still doesn't make a lick of sense to me, mate. Like you said, it's not quantum physics, but it might as well be. I mean, if you're going to have a rule, at least make it understandable, right? It's like when you buy a flat pack from IKEA and the instructions are all in Swedish. Just confusing for the sake of it. Single quote. And you're right about avocado on toast. I mean, who woke up one morning and thought, you know what I fancy? A slice of bread covered in green mush. It's not right, is it? You wouldn't put a banana on your toast, would you? It's just not natural. Single quote. Anyway, Ricky, you know me, I'll keep moaning. It's what I do. It's like you said, it's the simple things in life. Like a good moan, a cup of tea, and a biscuit. And maybe a bit of peace and quiet, but that's asking too much with you around, innit?
Alright Karl, you've got a point there. But let's be honest. With your head it's hard to tell if you're being clever or if you've just hit the nail on the head. By accident. About the emojis, well, who knew a tiny yellow face could express so much, right? I agree, it's like hieroglyphics. But let's not forget. Even the Egyptians had the decency to use a bird or a cat, not a laughing pile of poo. And the eggplant, well, I don't know what's worse. Your nan sending you an eggplant emoji thinking it's a vegetable. Or you actually thinking it's a vegetable. Last I checked, eggplants were fruits, Karl. I know, it's one of those things that doesn't make sense, like the offside rule. It's true, we do have enough ideas now. And I agree, none of them can make a decent cup of tea. But imagine if we'd stopped at the wheel. We wouldn't even have tea, Karl. Or slippers. You'd be sat there, barefoot, drinking hot water. As for avocado on toast, you're right. It's not natural. It's like putting a hat on a dog. It might look funny, but it doesn't make it right. And you're right again, you wouldn't put a banana on toast, would you? Although, I wouldn't put it past you, Karl. But you're right, you'll keep moaning. It's what you do. It's like your superpower. If moaning was an Olympic sport, you'd be a gold medalist. But you're wrong about one thing, Karl. Peace and quiet isn't asking too much with me around. It's impossible.
Well, Ricky, you've got a point there. I do have a knack for hitting the nail on the head, even if it's by accident. I think that's part of my charm, really. And yeah, those emojis. It's mad, innit? 1 minute. You're writing a proper sentence. The next, you're using a yellow face and a pile of poo to express yourself. I mean, what's wrong with a good old-fashioned smile or a frown? And don't even get me started on that eggplant business. It's a fruit, really? Well, that's another thing to add to the list of stuff that doesn't make sense. Along with the offside rule and those self-checkout machines at the supermarket. You're right, though. We've got to keep moving forward. Even if it means dealing with avocado on toast and other unnatural things. I mean, imagine if we'd stopped at the wheel. I'd be sat here barefoot, drinking hot water. That's something to think about, innit? As for the banana on toast, I think I'll pass. I like my food to make sense, thank you very much. And yeah, I'll keep moaning. It's what I do. It's like a hobby, really. Some people like to knit or do crosswords, I like to moan. And you're absolutely right, Ricky. Peace and quiet with you around is as likely as me growing a full head of hair overnight. But that's all right, keeps things interesting, doesn't it?